Welcome to Belly Flopping into Mysticism. My name is Penny Coleman, and today I'd like to share a tool that, had I heard of it or known about it in 1998 when I endured the severe stress breakdown, my belly flop into mysticism, this concept would have helped me immensely: the hero's journey. The hero's journey was popularized by Dr. Joseph Campbell. Joseph Campbell was an American literature professor at Sarah Lawrence University. He studied myths from all around the world, various different cultures, and came up with what he called the monomyth. And in his 1949 work, A Hero with a Thousand Faces, he presented what he called the hero's journey. There's several models that vary. If you Google hero's journey, some depictions show 17 steps, others show maybe 13 or 9. We'll talk about that. To me, the specific number of steps do not matter, but it can be a very helpful tool for people who are working through a difficult time or even a crisis, very much a mental journey that relates to the concept. One of the most common ways that I've seen it depicted is with this image. I did look on Wikimedia, it's called, and this image, from what I can tell, is free to share in terms of copyright. And I'm not going to go through all of the specifics to this, but basically we have the hero up here presented by his walking stick and a little backpack, gets a call to adventure. They end up crossing from what's called the known realm into some kind of unknown realm. They go through a series of trials and tribulations, often facing death, death of their old self into a birth of their new self, periods of transformation before coming back and returning to what's called the known realm. And in so doing, they come back with what's called boon or elixir, as far as something of value to that known realm. Now, I only learned about this back in 2018. Some people hear about it in their studies, maybe in English class or philosophy class. Many people don't. But the concept of going from a known realm into an unknown realm, that very much applied to me as I went through the mental breakdown that I endured. And my goal was to get back. In future segments, I'll share some other things that helped and other things that didn't. But this in general would have been a very helpful tool. And not only that, the people who are in what's called the known realm don't really understand what the unknown realm includes, entails. One thing that often comes up when looking into the hero's journey is that many movies and films also follow this. Star Wars was one that George Lucas, in the making of the original Star Wars, had heard of the hero's journey and intentionally created a plot that followed the main concepts. Other stories, like even some of the Disney films, The Little Mermaid, where Ariel goes from her known realm into an unknown realm, facing growth and transformation, but also danger and peril. As I mentioned, for me, I don't care as much about all the specific steps that often get attributed to a hero's journey. In more general, it's basically leaving that known world, going through a period of struggle and transition, and hopefully even growth. The main model does include this potential for growth, and then returning to that known world with knowledge about the journey, knowledge about the terrain, and even this boon or elixir. Just a couple of weeks ago, I was reading a book, The Importance of Suffering, by Dr. James Davies, who's a social anthropologist in the UK. And even in that book about the value of suffering, how we grow from suffering, how we recognize that in our suffering, things around us may need to change, or our relationship to the things around us may need to change. And he mentioned that social anthropologists have used this basic model for quite some time. He went into a somewhat lengthy description of it with these 3 steps. He never once used the phrase hero's journey. And even over the weekend, I attended a book sale at our library, came across a book by Joan Borisenko, who has a PhD in, I believe it's divinity, from Harvard University. And just even skimming through her book, she mentioned how anthropologists use a 3-stage process to describe a growth experience. And she mentioned the leaving the known world, the period of struggle and growth, and then returning. So this, what I call a basic hero's journey, is apparently out there within the social anthropologist training. To my knowledge, I don't know of a specific name associated with it, but it ties pretty much identically to what I call the basic hero's journey. Another way to display the hero's journey is not so much in terms of a circle, but rather more along, say, a timeline where the hero starts off, ends up in some kind of unknown realm. I could have perhaps shown underwater. That ties with the Campbell quote of belly flop, that I based belly flopping into mysticism. But in this unknown realm of different terrain, different materials, different experience, stuff beyond the norm, if you will. This often then shows a person reaching a different elevation or a higher perspective, a higher level of growth, having gone through that journey. Now, in terms of, there's plenty of variation possible with regard to the hero's journey. The images I've shown have been on a single piece of paper, a single plane, but that journey can take a person into different directions, different dimensions, different depths, different starting points. So that's what I wanted to try and present here. And in fact, some paths, if there's underlying currents and flows, which also ties to the Campbell quote of the psychotic so-called person, drowning in the same water that a mystic delights in. There are unknown currents flowing, how a person gets carried in that unknown world and where they can come up. Maybe they can come up anywhere, I don't know. This kind of reminds me of seals fishing through the ice and having certain breathing holes to come up from. That's not necessarily what I'm trying to present. I also wanted to indicate that often the hero's journey talks about depths, talks about going lower in a sense, but there could be cases where the hero's journey takes people to different elevations, different heights, different realms that way. What often happens is the hero's journey looks more like this. It's not a nice curve. It's not a nice basic flow where once you start to come up, you come right up. You may get hit by different things. You might have to change course. You might have to go in any number of different directions and dimensions. So that's what I'm indicating here. And even over here, where the little guy would end up coming up, may come up for a time and then have to find a better way to come back into that known world. Every person's hero's journey is going to be different, which is what I'm trying to show here. People have different starting points in terms of their personal history, their skills, whatever trauma they might have, their outlook on the world. People experience different terrain. That means just their own experiences, whether it's level of grief, whether it's level of excitement, could be involving the death of a loved one, an ego death. So things go at different depths. The person hits different things in that unknown realm. And of course, there's different directions and different resurfacing points. So while the concept is, I think, potentially quite useful for people who find themselves in a state, not in some kind of an unknown condition, presenting that as the simplified basic hero's journey could be quite helpful. But I think when trying to help someone or support someone through it, I think it's important to recognize that there are different starting points, that there are completely different experiences. And finally, I went from basically a single sheet to trying to present in more of a three-dimensional pattern, but also from a sphere, a person leaving instead of from a flat surface, leaving from a sphere. That adds yet a different dimensional element. And as I mentioned, this reminds me more of this Star Wars. That's one of the epic cases of a modern myth, if you will, a modern hero's journey that was intentionally designed that way. But again, people can leave from any point, go to different heights, different elevations, and figure out how to come back to the known realm, the known world, at any number of different points. And so finally, as I mentioned, how to envision the hero's journey can go with something a little more complicated, a little more detailed, or something quite basic with just the leaving the known world, going through the growth and transformation, and returning with knowledge and the idea of transformation and growth into a better state. So keep that in mind if you know someone struggling. For me, that would have helped right away. As soon as I saw that, I thought, wow, I was down here, and the people who were trying to, down here in the unknown, and the people who were trying to help me, according to their definition, I have more to say about that. I was harmed in that, but the people who were in a position to help me had not been in that unknown realm anywhere, but they were trying to tell me they understood the unknown realm from the position above that line. I don't think that's how it really works. That doesn't mean if you haven't had a mental crisis or severe mental challenge, that doesn't mean you can't help people. But it does mean that they are probably experiencing something that you don't fully understand. And by acknowledging that, you are in a better position to help someone through. So thanks for taking a few moments, but just keep this in mind as a potential tool that could help people in terms of how to frame their journey. And notice that I didn't mention anywhere in here that the person has a disorder, that a person is ill, that a person has a lifelong chronic illness. I was misdiagnosed as having bipolar, which I knew all along was wrong. And this is where I wish I had known about the hero's journey, and I could have said, no, if you'll let me back up into the known world, then I can describe my experience a little better. So thanks for taking some time with me, and I hope you found it of value.